We're trying to blow up the industry a little bit and help practitioners think differently so that we can really stop this madness of people spending tons of money on expensive labs, all these supplements, and not cause more trauma. People are trying to heal. And again, all of that starts at a cellular level. The body doesn't just throw hormones out of whack for fun. If we don't have enough cellular energy, the body's okay, I don't have enough energy to allow her hormones to function well, or I don't want her to bring a baby into this world because there's a lot of stress going on here and I don't know what that stress is. If calcium comes back really elevated, we can call that a calcium shell. But calcium is a very hard mineral. If you've ever seen calcium build up on a faucet, like you can see how hard it is. And so this can happen a lot because a person is actually armoring themselves from something. They're trying to protect themselves from something.
Welcome to Get Obsessed. I'm Natalie Cacon. This season, I'm in conversation with women who built methods, founders who built tools, women who lived through something the system didn't know what to do with, and built what they couldn't find. Today, I'm in conversation with Sara Korzeniewski, a registered dietitian, functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, HTMA practitioner, and co-founder of Wellness Code Academy. I came across her work through another program last year, and her approach absolutely stopped me in my tracks. Let's get into this episode. Hey, welcome back to Get Obsessed. I am so excited for this episode. As I was just telling my guest Sara, I was at a women's health conference all weekend and we were only talking about diagnostics. And so I'm so excited to get into the conversation about prevention. So I will let Sara introduce herself and talk a little bit about her background.
Yeah, my name is Sara Korzeniewski. I'm a registered dietitian by trade and started my career out very conventionally, but decided I didn't want to pursue that route. And I knew the only way to really work with people on a much more holistic level was by starting my own practice. So I worked one-on-one with women, particularly around a lot of gut and nervous system support, which of course we know encompasses hormones as well, and still do that to some degree, but much less. The last few years, I now work with a business partner, Jen, over at Wellness Code Academy, where we are focusing on teaching and supporting practitioners in working on a much deeper, much more trauma-informed, much more co-creative, transformational way with their clients. Because as you mentioned, we've come into this world of what we call standard functional medicine, which has largely become conventional medicine in maybe slightly better lighting, where now instead of medicines and standard labs, we're using supplements and functional labs. And so we're really trying to change the narrative around that and working on a much deeper, much more foundational level where practitioners learn to lead healing versus be the expert that tells people what to do. Because we know from a science perspective and a psychological perspective, that doesn't really lead to lasting healing. So we're trying to blow up the industry a little bit and help practitioners think differently so that we can really stop this madness of people spending tons of money on expensive labs, all these supplements, and not cause more trauma. People are trying to heal.
I love that. I love this approach. I listened to your seminar and I was like, I have to reach out right away because this approach blew my mind. I didn't even know that we can get to the root of so many of our issues just by understanding just the basic foundations of our own body, the minerals of our body. Pardon. Can you take some time to explain if someone is new to HTMA, like what exactly you're doing and what you're measuring?
Yeah. So HTMA stands for Hair Tissue Mineral Analysis Test. There are a variety of companies that you can get the test from, but there are really only a couple that we feel are more reliable and more accurate just because of how they actually run the hair sample and get the results. But essentially what it is, it's measuring minerals and toxic elements that have accumulated in the hair. And you're particularly looking at the root because that's really going to give you a snapshot of around the last 3 months of what someone's mineral status looks like. So, where blood, a lot of people go to the doctor and they get their blood drawn, which there can be value to it if you know what you're looking at, but that's just a snapshot of that moment that their blood was drawn. But blood also has to stay homeostatic. So it has to stay balanced, right? Because if not, we can become too acidic, too alkaline, and essentially that can be fatal. And the body knows this and it's smart and it wants to, its number one job is to keep us alive. And so it's going to push and pull minerals in and out of the blood to keep it at that level. So it's the blood is not really telling us what's happening at a cellular level, only at a blood level at that moment in time. And everything in the body starts at what's happening inside of the cell. It's like the engine for your car, right? And minerals are basically the gas. They're the spark plugs. They're the fuel that keep those cells functioning. And when our cells are functioning well, everything in the body can function better because everything requires energy. We need it to make hormones. We need it to digest. We need it to detox. We need it to keep our nervous systems regulated. We need it for everything. And so when things are starting to go awry at the cellular level, it's going to literally affect everything. So we want to be able to see and better assess what's happening at that level because that's where everything else is going to be affected. And so essentially when you're growing hair, your body does that. It's going to deposit minerals from inside of the cell in the hair. And so that's why we look at that because we can get a much larger snapshot of what's happening at the place that is like driving symptoms, driving illness. It's like health begins at a cellular level, but disease begins at that level too. So don't we want to look at that? Something by the time something shows up in the blood, it's already the 11th hour. Like it's been dysfunctional, dysregulated, whatever word you want to use at the cellular level for a long time, many years, if not decades, if not sometimes people's entire lives. So we really get a better idea of what's going on and how the body is adapting.
This approach is absolutely magnificent. I never thought about blood being the snapshot, but how blood wants to be homeostatic. So, of course, when we're looking at blood, we're only going to see that snapshot in the body trying to create balance. So, are we really getting that proper view of the body and what's actually happening at that cellular level? And of course, hair, it grows. We don't have a chance to come back to it and put it back in our root. So it's showing the full story. So that's just remarkable. And what would an imbalance of minerals, like how would it show up in the body? What would you see in
Yeah, the nice thing, so not everyone teaches HTMA the same way. And that's one reason why Jen and I created our Holistic HTMA Pro program, because we really believe that it's showing us not just physiologically what's going on, but also psychologically what's going on. It's really the only test that we know of that can actually look at both sides. And we know that mind and body are not separate. We can't heal one without the other. Most people are teaching HTMA from a very physiological standpoint. If they talk about psychological stuff, it's they touch on it, but they don't usually talk about like how to actually work with that. And they're usually just using or mainly using supplements, mineral supplements, as a way to correct the imbalances. But essentially, minerals are going to adapt based on someone's stressors. And we know stress, again, can be a physical thing, but it can also be a mental and emotional thing. Stress can come from hundreds of places, and the nervous system is the master regulator of physiology and psychology, right? Not one or the other. And so whenever we're under a stressor of any kind, it could be a relationship, it could be not eating foods that are optimal for us, it could be an infection, it could be some sort of traumatic event that happened to us, it could be busy jobs. Who doesn't have busy lives, right? So many different factors. And whenever we're under stress, especially chronic stress, meaning it's ongoing, which is an epidemic in our world today, the body needs fuel to support these stressors, right? And so it uses the gas, AKA the minerals, in order to deal with those stressors. So it can start to burn through certain minerals very quickly. It can start to push minerals in places that they're not really supposed to go. And that's just because the body is trying to protect itself. And because minerals are affecting our cells and cells affect literally every system in the body, it could show up in thousands of ways. Yes, people will start to feel like less energy, typically more fatigue, but they could also start to feel more anxious. They could start to feel more depressed. They could start to experience digestive issues, hormonal imbalances. Like, I really feel that literally every symptom, chronic symptom, I'll say, that someone might be experiencing, even if it starts out at a small whisper, because often we know that's the case and people ignore them or they're not bad enough, or they start thinking everybody's dealing with these types of symptoms. And so I would say just about any symptom you could possibly think of is a sign. Minerals are likely out of balance or out of whack or dysregulated or however you want to say it. And we don't want to ignore those types of things because the longer they go on, the more imbalanced things are going to get. Even people don't consider premature gray hair. That is a mineral thing because
Mm.
minerals are actually what color our hair. And so even things like that people don't connect the dots to can be a warning sign that might start out really quiet and start to scream louder and louder until we decide to pay attention to it.
That's, I'm like, as you're saying that, when I had my first miscarriage, that's when all my frontal gray hair started to come in. I'm like, I was under immense stress, and I definitely feel like that's what was happening in my body. Over time, it did a lot more of the color came back. So that was really interesting too. So I imagine that minerals can rebalance themselves after an acute amount of stress comes in. Is that something that could happen?
Sure, absolutely. Especially, I would say, if someone is supporting themselves in some way, whether, again, physiologically or just mentally and emotionally.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
I, yeah, I keep saying this. I love this approach. I find the medical world is treating acute pain, but we're living in a world of chronic pain. And so how do we come at it? And it seems like the HTMA method, or your method specifically, is really driving after the 12 systems of the body and understanding how these minerals are helping them to function and to push, not to push through, but to work at a balanced state. So when you first look at someone's HTMA, what patterns or ratios are you looking for? What stands out to you first?
The way that we teach it, typically we look at the four main minerals. So it tests dozens of minerals because we have lots of them, but we typically look at the first four, which are calcium, magnesium, sodium, and potassium, because those are essentially when those four are out of balance, it's going to be really challenging to balance your others because sodium and potassium act like a pump and they help pump other minerals in and out of the cell. And so when those are out of balance, everything else it causes like a domino effect,
Mhm.
essentially. And so we look at those first. And the thing with HTMA that I think a lot of people get wrong is that they look at it at face value. And it really, you can't just, it's not a black and white test at all. And they'll say, oh, it's low, so I must be deficient. And it's high, I must have too much. And that's not necessarily the case at all. So it's a very reading between the lines lab that takes a lot of skill to really understand what you're looking at. And so that's what we look at first. So if, let's say, magnesium comes back really elevated, we as practitioners, we also have to think very critically. And we also, again, we teach a very co-creative approach. So we don't want to sit here and tell our clients exactly what's going on in their bodies based on the lab. We want to have conversations with them. Say, hey, here's what I'm seeing. Does this resonate with you? Does this make sense to you, to what's going on? Because they're the ones living in their bodies, right? And so if a magnesium comes back really high, we as practitioners want to really develop the critical thinking skills to be able to ask effective questions to the person. And yes, they could be maybe taking magnesium, which is something important to know, but magnesium typically is going to go really high when someone is under a lot of stress because the body's going to burn through it. The demand for it is a lot higher. And so we can use that to start having more conversations and asking effective questions. If calcium comes back really elevated, we can call that what they call in the HTMA world a calcium shell. But calcium is a very hard mineral. If you've ever seen calcium build up on a faucet, like you can see how hard it is. And so this can happen a lot because a person is actually armoring themselves from something. They're trying to protect themselves from something. Like their body is literally creating a shell to prevent us from maybe feeling a negative emotion that we don't really want to feel, but we must feel it in order to support healing. And so again, we can use that information to then ask clients more strategic questions, maybe more metaphysical questions to tie things together. And then we look at ratios because minerals don't work in isolation, they work together. They can work with each other, they can also work against each other. So then we can look at the ratios and we can assess, physical things like how their adrenals are functioning, their thyroid, their nervous system, their gut, their immune function, all of those things. And then we can also look at some additional elements. There's different patterns that you might see. Maybe a lot of minerals are low, all of these things without teaching HTMA here. And then we can look at toxic elements. And again, just because someone doesn't have a lot of toxic elements initially on an HTMA doesn't mean they're not there because the body can be storing them, holding on to them. And that can be very telling. Or maybe they're showing a lot of toxins. So maybe there's a lot of exposure that we need to look at. But maybe they're also holding on to toxins because the body is not, it's not stupid. Like it does things for a reason. So sometimes it actually holds on to toxic elements because it's trying to create energy where there's not energy. Like it's almost trying to stimulate the body to try to give it a little oomph. The person is really flatlined. So it's like there's so much that we can see from it. But the beauty of the way that we teach it is we also very much focus on the metaphysical side of things and what minerals are telling us from a mental and emotional perspective. Because again, the body is not just a physical thing. It's an energetic, it's a mental and emotional factors that play huge roles as being big root causes. And so we can start to see patterns and start to ask more of those types of questions of, hey, we're seeing this pattern, and that can be a sign that you keep going, like you struggle to slow down. And they'll be like, oh my gosh, yes, that's totally me. Or where in your life are you swallowing your pain? Are you not speaking your truth because of a pattern that we're seeing on HTMA? And we can actually use it as an amazing coaching tool to help clients discover the factors of their life, the stressors going on in their own lives that are actually what's driving their health challenges, not just be like, oh, calcium's low, let's give you some calcium. You want to know why these patterns are happening. And again, not just from a physical side, but from that mental and emotional side as well.
I think it's so important. It's so true. If someone's low in calcium and you just give them calcium supplements, maybe it's not going to help because the body is being depleted of it anyways. So you're just taking it and who knows what it's actually doing in the body. So coming at it from this approach is such a beautiful way of integrating it and making sure that the minerals are being absorbed. When you're working, I'm going to go towards like the woman, the woman sphere. What patterns do you see in women that begin to influence their hormonal health across like different phases? So I know it's hard to cluster together because nothing works exactly the same in any body, but do you see clusters over time happening in certain transitions of women's hormonal health?
Yes, I would say that can potentially be the case. The thing when it comes to hormones, again, is the endocrine system, which produces our hormones, the adrenals, which influence hormones, the gut's going to influence hormones, all those things. And again, all of that starts at a cellular level. And it's like hormones don't, again, the body doesn't just throw hormones out of whack for fun. If we don't have enough cellular energy, the body's okay, I don't have enough energy to allow her hormones to function well. Or I don't want her to bring a baby into this world because there's a lot of stress going on here. And I don't know what that stress is. It could be that she doesn't have enough access to food, water, or shelter. And yeah, I don't want to bring a baby into that world, especially when so many people are essentially living in survival mode for
Mm.
various reasons. So the body starts to dial down the minerals because it's trying to conserve, right? And so initially, that's one of the beauties of HTMA is you can see what phase of stress someone is under. If maybe it's like a new stressor, like it's early stages, that will show up on an HTMA, like where you'll start to see sodium and potassium high because the adrenals are still pumping out stress hormones, which can cause those minerals to, again, you're burning through them because you're dealing with the stressors. But if we don't address that and we don't help with longer term regulation, then the body's just going to continue to burn. And no matter how much we're putting in, then it's just not enough. And so then over time, those minerals will start to trend down because now stress hormones are trending down too, because we're going into a more of a burned out state, right? But there are certain minerals like zinc. Zinc can be very much tied to testosterone and progesterone. And copper can be tied to estrogen. So if someone is dealing with excess copper, they might be dealing with a estrogen, quote unquote, dominant type presentation, which again, copper is not the root issue, but we can at least see it and assess it. And again, start asking deeper questions about what's ultimately driving that. But so many women, I would say, especially if they're younger, we start to see teenagers, people in their 20s, 30s, their stress minerals are typically higher because they're in the earlier stages. But like when I start to work with women in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and beyond, a lot of them are like mass burnout. So like all their minerals are low because again, they've been dealing with the stressors for so long and their hormones are going to reflect that because again, we need those minerals to allow all systems to function, including our endocrine system.
Mm, wow. Yeah, I was learning about the women's nervous system and understanding that it's way more sensitive and we have a lower threshold to pain and chronic pain it's so interesting to relate it to the minerals and how they work in the body. I imagine a woman undergoing perimenopause, they must be showcasing a lot of these symptoms. And so how in let's say when you get the data of someone moving through perimenopause and they showcase a lot of like chronic stress and you're looking at them, what are like the first questions that you might ask? Because I know your approach is very mind body. So what would be the first question of rebuilding awareness of coming into someone's body?
Yeah, that's one, I think one reason where HTMA, the way we teach it, is so helpful because we can use what information we're getting from that because we always say HTMA is not just a lab test, it's actually a life test because it can really get to how someone has been showing up in their life. And so many people are very disconnected from it. But we actually, there's a lot of different strategies that we teach practitioners. And one of them that we always recommend starting a lot of clients with is what we call being a participant and observer. And so I think so many people just go through their life and it's like they're just checking off their to-do list and they're never really stopping and slowing down. And sometimes people can't. Like they just, their body's in such a state of fight or flight that slowing down feels very uncomfortable, right? And it doesn't feel safe to the body. I think a big first step with people is even just teaching them that. And you could even ask them if you were to slow things down, even if it was just for 1 to 5 minutes a day, if that feels comfortable to you. And during that time, you were to ask yourself a couple of questions about how you feel, taking a pause and doing a quick body scan and checking in with different parts of you. Or how did you feel going through your day? What things maybe felt triggering to you? Just building awareness, being able to create space in their daily life to just stop and pause and be like, yeah, how did I feel today? Where might I be feeling certain things? That even is a good starting point for a lot of people. And doing it again in a slow, incremental way that their bodies can handle. But I even like to ask deep questions like, what intuitively do you feel that you need right now? People don't ask these things. Again, practitioners are like running the labs, getting their health history, and then handing them healing instructions, saying, here's what you need to do. Here's what foods to eat, what not to eat. And so they're not at all being led into their own healing journey. And so they're not even giving themselves the opportunity to connect with themselves more, which is, I think, one of the biggest issues with standard functional medicine. And you could even ask them, do you feel that your issues are driven more by a physiological thing or a psychological thing, or do you feel it's an equal combination of both? Even just powerful questions like this to get them to think for themselves about what's going on. Or what do you feel right now is the biggest stressor going on in your life?
Mm. Yeah, I'm going to say it again. I love it so much. I think it's so important. I think there is such a lack of that in the medical world. No one's asking any questions. No one's listening to the patients. And having those questions to be able to guide the client or the patient to actually think for themselves and say, okay, your body knows what to do. I think you said at the beginning, your blood is always looking for homeostasis. So it's always looking to heal itself. And so if we can guide them into their body to help them just feel, okay, at this point, at this time of the day, I don't feel good. What's happening around me? What's the ecosystem that I'm in right now? Maybe, okay, that's that little change. That's that little change. And then over time, you help guide your client patient into a new way of caring for themselves. And something that's so interesting is that new research has said that the person that's sitting in front of you, the caretaker, can really guide the experience of wellness. And so I think that is really lacking in the medical world. So to have places where people can come, and this is yes, you're looking at all the data of someone's minerals and foundations, but you're actually taking the time to really get to know the person in front of you and allowing themselves to get to know themselves. I think that is so special that we don't really see that in a lot of different places. What are like the testimonials? What have you heard from these people that are coming to you? Are they like, oh my gosh, this is the best care I've ever received?
Yeah, everyone that I've worked with and done HTMA with, and we talk about their results and what they mean and ask them the questions. And again, does this resonate with you? Does this all feel like it makes sense to your life? I've had people be like, wow, you must be a witch because you described me to a T. And my business partner, Jen, even said that one of her clients one time was like, I learned more in using this than I have in the last 5 years of therapy
Mm,
because we always say minerals don't lie, especially if you know what you're looking at and like how to assess it and how to ask good questions to the clients because so many people right now We live in a very stressful world. We do. And we're not meant to live 100% stress free by any means, but it's become the norm. People don't often realize how stressed they really are. They can be stress deniers. Oh, yeah, I'm not under stress. Or sometimes you'll have clients who will say, I don't have any more stress than anybody else. And it's like, that's great, but that doesn't mean it's not affecting you. Or they really truly don't understand where all their stressors are coming from because people think stress is, oh, yeah, I'm busy. I have children and I'm homeschooling and I'm working and all those things, which, yes, of course, those are stressors. But then they don't think about the fact that they maybe don't have a lot of self-confidence or they're a people pleaser or a perfectionist or those types of things are stressors. And we know it's about the stress bucket being too full and trying to decrease the stress, but also be able to change our relationship with the stress that we do have and all of those types of things. So yeah, like people are always blown away. There are some people who will be like, "Oh, there's not a lot of research on HTMA," which I don't really think is necessarily true. There's also a lot of research on, there's tons of research on minerals. Like minerals are science. Like we can't deny that. But it's like we forget about using it in practice and like seeing people be like, wow, yes, this is me. This is exactly what I feel like is going on. And for a lot of clients, one of the biggest reasons why people struggle with their health is because they feel like they've lost a lot of power in their own lives for whatever reason. And so, if as a practitioner, we feel it's our job to provide someone with their answers and to be their fixer and to just hand them a personalized healing plan and be like, all right, here's what you need to do. And unfortunately, we're also trying to, we don't want to just blame the practitioners, but we also want to get the self healers to know that you really shouldn't be going to a practitioner and say, just tell me what to do. There are a lot of people doing that. Just give me the plan I need to follow because that's just to continuing to prevent that person from getting their power back. And
Mhm.
that's a really big factor. And so being able to use HTMA to help them become aware of the factors that they have going on that are driving their health challenges and then bringing them into the process so that they can become empowered, then that's what's really going to lead to the long-term healing. And seeing that actually happen in practice, like that to me is way more powerful than any research study or like whatever that you
Mm.
have going on.
Yeah,
Yeah, I was going to say is count time and time again, not just from our own clients, but from the clients of the practitioners that we teach are seeing all of these things.
yeah, I think you're touching on something so important and vital about healthcare that it really comes down to the individual. We look at race, ethnicity, wages, virality, psychosocial, emotional, mind, body, all these things definitely take effect. And I'm sure you've seen it in your practice that all these things will change how minerals are distributed through their body and what they're feeling. And it's so nice that you're really touching upon each component to really drive and see what it is in their body that's reacting to what bucket. And so I think I'll say it again. I really just love this approach. I think it's beautiful. And I think you also said it in the beginning. I'm going to restate it, is the blood will give you that snapshot. But when you're already past your homeostatic level, you're in danger zone. And so there's no prevention. And what you're creating is prevention. You're creating that moment to be like, okay, let's take this hair follicle, let's see what's going on in your body, and let's talk about it so that we don't get to that danger zone. And I think that's absolutely incredible. When you work with a client, like how long does, or I guess it's client dependent, but when do you go for the retest of the hair, or do you retest the hair?
Yes, we really recommend people retesting on a regular basis, ideally, because that way they can keep on top of things. But HTMA is really average of what's been going on for 3 months. So we typically don't recommend, in most cases, unless there's some nuance going on, of retesting any earlier than 3 months. But generally speaking, I say 6 months is good. And then you can get to a point where maybe you're just doing it every year, sometimes every few years, depending on how long you've been at it. But you're also getting a hair sample, so we don't want to test too frequently because then people won't have. And there's a lot of women out there who are losing a lot of hair already, and they kind of, nobody wants to take more than necessary. But as we say with anything, there is no quick fix to healing chronic health challenges. And again, HTMA is not about running the test, taking the minerals, and now you're good to go. Okay, off you go, right? Because we say minerals, whether it be supplements or even with food, is 20% or less of the mineral balancing journey. 80% is the deeper work. And that's the stuff that a lot of people avoid because it's uncomfortable and it's challenging and it's not a linear thing. And so we know healing is a marathon, not a sprint. Mineral balancing is no different. We can't expect to run a HTMA, again, do a protocol, and then now we're good. It's an ever evolving thing. And healing is like peeling back layers of an onion.
Mm-hmm.
There can be something called retracing during the healing journey where it's almost like the body is like rewinding itself. And so you might feel like you've worked on one area and there's then something else now decides to present itself. And it might not just be a physical symptom, but an emotion, something emotional starts to come up to the surface. And so now we got to kind of work on that. So it's ever evolving. But yeah, retesting, I think that's a part I wish people were able to do more. But again, I think they get into a state where they run an HTMA, maybe they're even feeling better, which is great, which is often the case, but then they think, okay, I'm done now.
Mm-hmm.
And then they don't necessarily keep on top of it. But that's something that I think everyone should do, regardless of what you're doing when it comes to.
Yeah, I don't think we're ever done because we're constantly evolving. You said it. It's so true. Because you mentioned hair, and of course this whole thing is about hair, but hair falling out, can retracing your minerals, can rebuilding your minerals help with hair growth?
Oh, 100%. For sure, because I think a lot of people probably lose hair because of a stressor of some kind. And that could be, again, a variety of things and probably a combination of many different factors. So yeah, I've seen that happen. You mentioned the pregnancies and stuff like that, and that's some women shed their hair a lot during that time, and then it tends to grow back because growing a human baby is not a easy or thing for the body. It's a stressor, right? So
Mhm.
yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I think especially for women, we're constantly going through transitions from puberty to pregnancy to postnatal to perimenopause to menopause. Like at each phase, would you suggest for women to get their hair checked to see that everything is coming back to rebalance?
Yeah, I definitely recommend it. Again, you always want to make sure you're choosing your practitioners wisely
Mhm.
because I don't recommend the approach of running an HTMA and then mostly just doing a lot of supplements or not working with someone who works co-creatively but just hands you personalized healing plans because especially if you really want to get to the root and have more of the long-term healing and a practitioner who can really work with you specifically versus here's how I learned how to do HTMA and there's no deviating from that because I've had people come to me and say my practitioner told me I needed all of these supplements in order to fix my minerals, but I don't tolerate them. But they
Mhm.
say I need them in order to heal. And so again, as practitioners, we want to learn to think much more critically in those types of situations and be able to change and adapt. So
Mhm.
yeah, I would love to live in a world where everyone was able to get hair tissue done on a regular basis. And depending, blood work again can be great. And yeah, insurance might cover those types of things, but I know a lot of people whose insurances maybe don't cover them. And to be honest, a hair tissue mineral is less expensive than paying out of pocket for blood work.
Mhm.
In the US, practitioners can get an HTMA for $65. I don't know of any lab test, that's that amount. And I sometimes if I go get blood, because if I want to get blood work done the way that I want to get it done, I typically have to pay out of pocket because not all doctors are open to it or will order all the things you want to order. And you're spending hundreds of dollars,
Hmm.
something than that.
When I think about HTMA and your approach, I think about all these women on SSRIs postnatally or just because of all the chronic stress that they have to carry and all the buckets they hold throughout their life. I feel like, does this speak to you? Does rebuilding the minerals, the base minerals, can help with anxiety and depression and through your approach, of course, with with the mental and the body care?
Yeah, for sure. And the nice thing about we don't believe in dogma. Is there a time and a place for SSRIs? 100%. Absolutely, because that can be beneficial. We're not anti-supplement, anti-protocol, anti-labs, anti-medication. What we do promote is using them much more strategically and conservatively. And when the approach is going to change based on some of these factors. But yes, if you looked at someone's HTMA and they have a calcium shell, for example, where calcium is really high, as I mentioned, it's like the body going into armor mode. And when it's doing that, it's typically trying to protect it from feeling a negative emotion of some kind. And so then we can start to, again, ask the questions about where that is coming from. Where in their life do they feel like they're on guard or that they need to armor themselves or protect themselves? Where do they feel like they have to be hard and strong and sturdy in order to feel safe? And then when we can look at those things and start to have more for some people, just being able to speak to that feeling, because it's like, again, no one's ever asked them that and they've just been holding on to it and they finally have someone who will listen to them and they can talk about it too. That's going to be empathetic and not judge them. But so then we can start looking at those factors and possibly helping to bring that down through, again, both a physical and a mental and emotional strategies that we co-create with the client, and then they might be able to wean off the SSRIs. But at the end of the day, we also know that anxiety and all those things are very driven by nervous system dysregulation, accumulated trauma, which I would really put a bold statement out there that says anyone dealing with a chronic health challenge likely has some trauma, whether they realize it or not, because it's not always just large, big events. And they've now have low cellular energy because of those stressors. And that is ultimately what can drive more of that anxiety as well. Being able to use the HTMA to help look at those root causes, because I don't know of any other lab test that can actually look at metaphysical factors. It's all looking at just the physical stuff. And
Mhm.
even little tests, great. I don't even run them anymore because they're not 100% accurate, but they're also very expensive, but they're just another symptom ultimately.
Mhm. Yeah, I think what you've created is such a beautiful support system for the body and even support system for the medical world. Whether you do it alone or in conjunction, I think it's good to see where your minerals are and how they work in your body because like you said, they're the spark plugs, they're the drivers. Before we close, just like how did you come up with this concept of putting it all together for your clients?
Great question. Yes. So again, I'm a dietitian by trade, and I've taken other HTMA courses and again learned a lot of the super basics and much more of the physiological side. And it was learning a lot of supplement protocols to give clients. While, yeah, okay, yeah, you still address lifestyle and stress, but again, it's typically taught in a you tell them what to do scenario, which again we know is not really where lasting healing happens. But my business partner Jen, her story is uber fascinating, but she dealt with her own chronic health issues for 20 years. She's a 20-year high school teacher, burned out of her career, had to go on disability, and ended up going down the functional medicine route and spent $500,000 out of pocket trying to get well. And she was worse. She did every clinic, protocol, lab, probably the same lab run 5 different times, different protocols, all those things, and eventually ran out of money, as unfortunately a lot of people are doing these days. And so it was basically like, I have to figure this out for myself or I'm going to die. And so she actually set out to become her own best self healer, learned a lot, read a lot of books, took a lot of her own training programs, things like that, and actually was able to get herself well. And she actually uncovered, again, the gaps in functional medicine and started to really understand these deeper root causes that nobody ever really addressed with her or sometimes even brought up to her when they were working together. And she actually has a master's in psychology herself. And when we set out to create a program, we were like, hey, she was like, hey, what if we did a HTMA program, but we didn't just teach the physical side of things, but we actually brought in the psychological aspects of it. And so I was like, wow, I didn't even know that was possible because that wasn't what I was taught. And so we brought the best of everything that we've learned in our professional, but also our personal healing journeys and brought that together to create this program, which we are mega proud of because, yeah, the more that I learned about minerals and what they could show us from a mental and emotional standpoint, considering that's a big component of healing, I was a little upset. I was like, why is no one else talking about this part of it? Because it's massively important. So that's how it came about. And there's various people that have developed HTMA, the test itself, and like Dr. Eck, who was one of the main kind of founders of it, who's no longer alive, but he spent like something like 20 years researching it by using it. And he actually talks a lot about the psychological component of it as well. But again, I think no one brought it in because they didn't have that experience that Jen has. Because she's got her master's in psychology, but also she lived it.
Mm.
Because her big root cause was trauma, the dysregulation, like all those things that nobody really brought in because they were focusing on running the labs and creating the protocols and doing the IV treatments and all of those types of things. So we've used our own self, but also still a lot of the other information that's out there about HTMA and brought it all together, synthesized it, and it's the best of all of those things combined.
Yeah, I'm gonna say it again. I love this approach so much because it's absolutely true what you're saying. It's like you can have this diagnosis and people can give you all these protocols, but our bodies are stubborn. If they're running at this state, then they might not just, they won't receive what you're giving unless you're diving into the psychological component of it and really releasing that trauma or releasing whatever's going on in the body so the body can absorb these nutrients and minerals and all the goodness that caretakers are trying to provide. So I think it's amazing. If someone wanted to work with you, take your training, how do they do that?
Yeah, so they can visit wellnesscodeacademy.com. We also do a 5-day challenge. It's called Breakthroughs Beyond Protocols, and that can be a great first stepping stone to really get a better idea of what our approach looks like and learn to start working in this way. And then if they want to, they can join our big program, which is our Holistic HTMA Pro program. It is designed for practitioners, but we have had self-healers go through it themselves because it's hard to find practitioners that work this way. There's not near enough, in my opinion, in my experience. So that's a good starting point. We created this academy. So we do have a lot of other training programs and resources and things like that. But since that's the one we're talking about today, then that's where you can find us.
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. I think my listeners are going to absolutely love this episode because Yeah, yeah, it's empowering, it's validating, and it starts to open up the door to like, hey, what is really going on and what is your intuition telling you? And take a pause, take that moment of self-reflection. And I think that's so important. So again, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. I loved it.
That was Sara Korzeniewski. You can find her work in the show notes. Please go and look. What she's doing is tremendous. If something in this episode stayed with you, I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment, send me a message, tell me what landed. I'm Natalie Cacon. This is Get Obsessed. We'll be back in 2 weeks.